Hey friends, dim the lights and pull your blanket a little closer. Because tonight, we're not telling history the way textbooks do. These are the untold affairs of kings and queens, of secret poets and quiet guards. Stories too soft or too scandalous for official records. Some ended in exile. Some ended in poems. Some were never allowed to begin. So settle in. Breathe gently. And let's begin with the first of 100 royal hearts that broke in silence. You are now drifting into a candlelit hall in early Tudor England, where a girl not yet queen loved a man not yet broken. Before Henry VIII ever laid eyes on Anne Boleyn, she had given her heart to Henry Percy, heir to the Earl of Northumberland. It wasn't arranged. It wasn't plotted. They simply loved each other, quietly. Walks in garden alcoves, exchanged glances over scripture, and hoped that maybe rank didn't matter. But the court watched. And Cardinal Wolsey, sensing trouble, tore the match apart, insisting Percy marry someone more appropriate. Anne was dismissed from court in disgrace. Heart bruised, name whispered. Years later, when she returned as the king's obsession, the man she once loved now served in her husband's court. They never spoke again. Can you imagine seeing the one you loved standing beside the man who took everything from you? History remembers Anne for her crown, her rise, her fall. But once she was just a girl who loved a boy and lost him to silence. And somewhere in that silence, her heart hardened. Oh, what if history had let them stay small and quiet? Might she have kept her head? Hey, friends, close your eyes and picture a palace not made of stone, but of velvet secrets. Empress Catherine the Great ruled with sharp brilliance, but loved with a fever only Great Potemkin matched. He wasn't her husband. He wasn't a noble prince, just a military man with a mind as wild as hers. They met in the chaos of court. She, newly crowned. He, ambitious and restless. Their letters? Thousands. Their connection? Deep and magnetic. But it was dangerous. The court gossiped. Foreign dignitaries watched. So they arranged a quiet solution. Marriage, maybe, but only whispered. No priest, no papers. Just rings exchanged in private, sealed with promises history would never verify. Even after the flame faded, he remained her closest advisor. She trusted no one like him. And when he died, she locked herself in her chamber and didn't speak for days. A love too vast for titles, too strategic for romance, yet unmistakably real. Can you imagine loving someone so completely that even when the affair ends, they still sit in the throne room of your thoughts? Catherine ruled an empire, but Potemkin, he ruled her heart. You're lying beneath satin sheets in the glittering shadow of Versailles, where everything shimmered, except safety. Marie Antoinette, the Austrian Queen of France, was lonely. Crowned too young, misunderstood, and marooned in a foreign court. And then, Count Axel von Fersen entered her orbit, a Swedish diplomat with calm eyes and a quiet dignity. He never sought attention. That alone drew hers. They danced at masked balls, exchanged letters written in invisible ink, and met beneath the noise of chandeliers. He was her confidant, her escape, maybe more. When the revolution threatened her world, Fersen risked everything to help the royal family flee. Disguises, forged papers, escape routes. He planned it all. But the plan failed. They were captured. She would be imprisoned, tried, and eventually executed. He lived on, never married, and protected her legacy fiercely. Can you imagine loving someone the world turned into a villain, and never being able to say their name aloud again? History leaves space for doubt, but between their letters, their risks, and his grief, there is a tenderness no guillotine could sever. Hey friends, dim the lights as we step into post-war Britain, where one princess met a man she could not keep. Princess Margaret, the glamorous sister of Queen Elizabeth II, fell in love with Group Captain Peter Townsend, war hero, divorced, calm in a world of chaos. They met not in scandal, but in stillness. He saw her, not her title, not her lineage, just her. But Britain wasn't ready. A royal couldn't marry a divorcee, especially not while the Church of England stood in judgment. Parliament disapproved. The crown remained cold. Margaret was given a choice: marry him and lose her royal status, or stay a princess and lose him. She stayed. Years passed. She married someone else. So did he. But the softness in their eyes, captured in black and white photographs, never quite vanished. Can you imagine choosing duty over desire? Because the world told you love wasn't proper. They never spoke ill of each other. Not once. As if silence was the last thing they shared. Sometimes, the most scandalous affairs are the ones that never happened. You might be resting now, eyes half closed, as we drift back to the smell of ink and powder in post-revolutionary France. Napoleon Bonaparte, brilliant general, future emperor, fell completely, foolishly, endlessly in love with Joséphine de Beauharnais. She was older, sophisticated, a widow of the Reign of Terror, and he wrote her letters like he was on fire. She, on the other hand, was less convinced. Their courtship was uneven. He adored. She hesitated. But still, they married. He went off to war. She remained in Paris. Rumors bloomed. Affairs, parties, distractions. He wrote pleading letters. She replied late. When he became emperor, he crowned her empress. Still, she bore him no heir. Eventually, heartbreakingly, he divorced her for the sake of an heir, but cried as he signed the decree. Yet they remained close. He sent her gifts. She saved his letters. And after her death, he said no woman had ever matched her place in his heart. Can you imagine loving someone who didn't always love you the same, but you never stopped choosing them anyway? History may call it strategic, but his letters, they were all heart. Dear listener, take a deep breath. The wind is swirling through 1930s London, and a king is about to break the rules. Edward VIII, charismatic, restless, modern, fell in love with Wallis Simpson, an American woman twice divorced. The British press held its breath. Parliament whispered. The church declared it impossible, but he wouldn't let go. The woman I love, he called her. He asked, begged, pleaded. Let me have her and keep my crown. The answer was no. So, in December 1936, he abdicated, gave up the throne, left Buckingham Palace behind, all for her. They married in France, banished from the royal circle, mocked by society, and yet they held hands into old age. Portraits show them smiling, not with grandeur, but with survival. Can you imagine walking away from the throne, not for glory, but for love? He never ruled, but in that decision he rewrote what it meant to be royal. Sometimes scandal isn't about breaking vows. It's about keeping them in private, You're now stepping softly into early 20th century Spain, where love came at a steep cost. Alfonso XIII of Spain and Victoria Eugenie, Ana of Battenberg, were cousins by royalty, distant by heart. He saw her at a dinner in London and declared she would be queen. She agreed, despite warnings. The scandal? She carried a gene for hemophilia, unknown to many but known to her family. A disease fatal to male heirs. Still, they married. Their sons inherited it. One bled from a simple cut. Another died young. The Spanish public blamed her. She became isolated, both as a mother and as a queen. Their marriage strained. He took mistresses, fathered illegitimate children. Yet she remained by his side, for the monarchy, for the children. Can you imagine knowing your love might pass on pain and being blamed for it forever? In quiet rooms Ina grieved alone, yet never fled. That, too, was a kind of royalty. Hey, friends, drift into the Hawaiian breeze of the late 19th century, where islands and empires clashed. And a young princess fell in love with a storyteller. Ka'iulani, heir to the Hawaiian throne, was educated in England. Intelligent, poised, and painfully aware of her kingdom's fragile future. While abroad, she met Robert Louis Stevenson. Yes, the author of Treasure Island. He was older, married, but they shared a connection rooted in sorrow and poetry. He admired her spirit. She found in him a listener. Some say he fell in love. Others say he simply protected her legacy through his pen. She never ruled. The kingdom was annexed. She died at just 23. But in Stevenson's writings, she became eternal. Can you imagine leaving no heirs, no rule, and yet being remembered through metaphor? Their affair, if it ever truly was one, lived more in words than touches. Sometimes, history's most tender love letters are printed in books, not addressed to people. You're now entering the grand opera of 1840s Munich, where a king lost his throne to a dancer. Ludwig of Bavaria was an aging monarch. Lola Montez was a young Irish performer pretending to be Spanish nobility. He saw her on stage and brought her into his life, court and bed. The scandal? She controlled him, advised him, fought with his ministers. He gave her titles, land, influence. The people rioted. Eventually, he abdicated. She vanished. He wrote poetry about her for the rest of his life. Can you imagine falling for someone who burned everything down and still calling it worth it? He lost a kingdom, but gained an immortal muse. Dear listener, you're now breathing in the cool mist of Norway's fjords. And for once, we end not in heartbreak, but in quiet courage. Prince Karl of Denmark married Maud of Wales, but his true love was his aide-de-camp, Hans Reidar Holtermann. Their friendship was deep, loyal, and secret. A future king could never love a man, not publicly. But in private, they shared walks, glances, quiet conversations beneath the stars. When Karl became King Haakon VII of Norway, Holtermann remained by his side. No scandal ever broke, no confession ever came, just lifelong devotion. Can you imagine hiding your truest self, and still leaving behind a reign remembered for peace? Sometimes the most scandalous thing is loving quietly. Hey, friends, the candlelight flickers across 17th century Stockholm, and a queen chooses poetry over politics. Christina of Sweden ruled with wit and eccentric brilliance. She wore men's clothing, rejected marriage, and stunned her court by abdicating the throne entirely. But before that, there was Ebba. Christina called her Belle, her most beautiful, most beloved. They exchanged intimate letters, shared rooms, and walked arm in arm through court gardens. She called Ebba her bedfellow of the heart. The court murmured. Was it friendship? Was it more? Christina never said. But she wept when Ebba married another, left Sweden behind, and never quite loved anyone again. Can you imagine loving someone so deeply you give up a crown, but never get to call them yours? Sometimes the history books forget that heartbreak can sound like abdication. You're now gliding over a still lake in Bavaria, where swans float like ghosts, and a king dreams of a world that never was. O Ludwig II, builder of fairy tale castles, patron of Wagner, lover of midnight walks, was known as the Swan King. He avoided marriage, withdrew from politics, and surrounded himself with beauty. But he also had a stablemaster, Richard Hornig. Their letters were affectionate, personal, filled with longing. Hornig remained with Ludwig for years, managing his beloved horses and, perhaps, guarding his heart. The exact nature of their bond was never written in bold, just margins and metaphors. Eventually, Hornig left, some say pushed out by ministers, others by quiet fear. Ludwig died under mysterious circumstances in a lake, alone. Can you imagine being remembered for your castles, but your most tender story left unwritten? The swans still glide, but the letters have faded. Dear listener, wrap yourself in something warm. We're sailing from Belgium to Mexico, where love crossed oceans and shattered thrones. Charlotte, daughter of King Leopold I, married Archduke Maximilian of Austria. It was strategic, of course, but to everyone's surprise it became a real bond. Gentle, trusting, even joyful. Then came the offer, rule Mexico with European backing. They accepted. A crown, a dream, a trap. Maximilian was executed by revolutionaries. Charlotte, who fought desperately for his life, returned to Europe and broke completely. She never recovered, lived for decades in seclusion, speaking to walls, calling his name. Can you imagine loving someone so fiercely you lose yourself when they're gone? History remembers the empire, but this was just a wife who watched her world collapse and loved him anyway. You are now stepping into a Neapolitan palace filled with political plots and forbidden paintings. Queen Maria Carolina of Naples, sister to Marie Antoinette, was a sharp strategist and fierce ruler. But behind the politics, there was Emma Hamilton, wife of the British ambassador, muse to painters, and fire to every room she entered. They became close, very close. Emma taught her English. Maria gifted her jewels. Letters grew more poetic. Whispers circled. Was it affection, alliance, or something warmer? Eventually, war shattered everything. Emma fled with her husband. Maria's kingdom fell. But in Emma's diary, among battles and banquets, Maria's name appears again and again. Can you imagine ruling a kingdom and hiding your heart between treaties? The crown fell, but the memory never quite did. Hey, friends, let's lean back into Restoration England, where theater, wit, and scandal waltzed together every night. Charles II had many mistresses, but Nell Gwyn was different. A former orange seller turned actress, Nell wasn't born noble. She made people laugh, even the king. He adored her spirit. She called him Charles III, after her 2 spaniels. They lived comfortably, if unofficially. She bore him sons. He granted her a house, and when he was dying, he begged his brother, "Let not poor Nellie starve." Can you imagine being loved so deeply that a king's final breath was for you, and not his queen? History called her a mistress, but to him she was home. Hey, friends, dim the lights. It's time to meet Napoleon's little sister, who stirred as many hearts as revolutions. Pauline Bonaparte was known for her beauty, boldness, and scandal. Married off to a nobleman, she quickly grew bored. Then came Jules de Canouville, a dashing officer who matched her flirt for flirt, secret for secret. They traveled, dined, disappeared together. Their affair wasn't whispered. It roared. But war called. Jules was sent to Russia and never returned. Pauline mourned in silk and silence. No grand proclamations, just a locked drawer of letters never sent. Can you imagine loving someone with such wild joy and losing them to a battlefield instead of betrayal? The empire faded, but the memory stayed, folded, scented, never forgotten. You're floating now between France and Spain, where dynasties crossed paths, and hearts quietly fluttered. Philip II of Spain married Elizabeth of Valois, daughter of the French king. She was young. He, older, somber, buried in bureaucracy. But there was another man, Don Carlos, his own son. Don Carlos adored Elizabeth, wrote poems, left flowers, called her my light. She, in turn, was kind to him, but cautious. Rumors grew. Did she love the father or the son? Historians argue still. What is known? Don Carlos was imprisoned by Philip. He died soon after. Elizabeth, too, passed not long later. Can you imagine being caught between crown and affection, and losing them both? No letters remain, just silence in Spanish marble. Hey friends, settle in for one of the messiest royal unions ever. Yet somehow, even that had its tenderness. Caroline married George IV of England. From the start, they clashed. He found her awkward. She found him insufferable. But they still had a daughter. He took lovers. She traveled. The court snickered. And then came the trial. George tried to strip her of her title, a public spectacle. Caroline arrived anyway, dressed in defiance, cheered by crowds. Did they love each other? Likely not. But did they miss what might have been? Perhaps. Can you imagine sharing a life with someone who never understood you, but always watched? History remembers the trial. But maybe, beneath the drama, 2 lonely people once hoped for peace. Dear listener, close your eyes. Russia is vast and cold, but in Peter's youth there was warmth in a merchant's daughter. Anna Mons was of Dutch descent, living in Moscow's foreign quarter. Peter visited often, laughed, learned, and fell for her. They weren't married. She had no title. But for years she was his comfort between wars and reforms. Then, like a storm, he changed, grew colder, married another, ordered Anna to leave. She refused. Eventually, he seized her estate and placed her under watch. Her love, once royal favor, became a crime. Can you imagine being cherished, then punished for being remembered? She died quietly, but her story clings to the halls Peter built. You're now stepping into the Forbidden City, where silence was law and affection was dangerous. Cixi, concubine turned empress of Qing China, ruled from behind a screen. But in her private world was a young eunuch, An Dehai. He served her closely. Too closely, some whispered. He wore silk robes, traveled beyond his station, and grew confident because she allowed it. The court took notice, and one day, without her consent, they executed him. She mourned in fury and grief. She never replaced him. Can you imagine loving someone in secret, only to learn their life ended without your voice? Her reign lasted decades, but she never forgot the one she wasn't allowed to save. Hey friends, pull the blanket closer. You're entering Windsor Castle, long after dusk, where whispers carried more power than titles. Queen Victoria, in her final decades, found herself weary, widowed, and surrounded by formality. Then came Abdul Karim, a young Indian clerk, humble yet bright-eyed. She called him Munshi, teacher. He called her mother. Their friendship scandalized the royal household. He taught her Urdu, shared curry recipes, and offered something no one else dared: honesty. They wrote daily, traveled together, sat for portraits. Court officials seethed. After her death, they burned every letter between them. Can you imagine having your dearest companion erased from your legacy, as if love or friendship never happened? History eventually uncovered the truth. Her final years were softened by someone forbidden. Dear listener, close your eyes to the flicker of Balkan torchlight and a love that courted rebellion. Alexander I, King of Serbia, was young and stubborn. He fell for Draga Mašin, a widowed lady-in-waiting, older and from lesser nobility. But oh, how he adored her! The court objected. The people rioted. Even his own generals warned him. But Alexander married her anyway, made her queen. They ruled together, fought together, fell together. One summer night, both were assassinated by their own guards, dragged from their bed. No mercy shown. Can you imagine dying in the arms of the only person who never asked you to be a king? They're buried together, and in that unity, their defiance still breathes. Hey, friends, let's step quietly into Victorian England, where love dared not say its name. Prince Albert Victor, grandson to Queen Victoria, was poised to be king. But history remembers him not for his politics, but his mystery. Among his circle was George Cecil Ives, a poet and early advocate for gay rights. Their friendship was intimate, the kind that traded gloves, poems, coded glances. There's no official proof of an affair, but in Ives's diary, a pseudonym appears: Adrian, believed by many to be Albert. He died young. Rumors of scandal and silence still echo. Can you imagine living in a world where love required masks, and still trying to keep it alive with poetry? He never ruled, but his shadow still wanders the palace corridors. You are now floating through mid-20th century Iran, where a queen's heartbreak was softened by friendship the world misunderstood. Queen Soraya, wife of Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, was stunning, educated in Europe, loved dearly by her husband, but unable to bear children. The Shah divorced her for duty, but in her quiet despair, one man remained: Ernest Perron, a Swiss poet, servant, and court whisperer. Rumors bloomed. Was he the Shah's confidant? Or hers? What truly passed in moonlit hallways? What's known, Soraya wept for him. He never left her side until exile forced them apart. Can you imagine finding solace in someone who wasn't yours to keep, but yours entirely in spirit? Sometimes devotion wears no label, just presence. Dear listener, settle in for a quieter court. Lisbon in the 1840s, where music softened duty. Queen Maria II, one of Portugal's most resilient monarchs, reigned through revolts and reform. But beneath her strong will lived a quieter ache. She adored music. One court composer, known only in fragments, was said to play for her nightly. Their meetings, brief. Their bond, quiet. He dedicated works to her under pseudonyms. She sent poems back, never signed. The court never confirmed it, but chambermaids told stories. Can you imagine hearing your own heart set to piano keys and knowing the composer loved you in every note? Their songs outlived their whispers. Hey friends, let's walk into the fading light of pre-war Europe, where royal houses danced on the edge of ruin, and hearts chose art over diplomacy. Prince Nicholas of Greece was an artist at heart. He married Grand Duchess Elena of Russia, a union arranged but surprisingly tender. Yet within that union was another story, a long exchange of letters with Russian ballerina Matilda Kshestinska. Intimate, passionate, yet never public. No affair was declared, but Elena knew, and she chose silence over scandal. Can you imagine loving someone while knowing their heart lived partly on a stage? Sometimes royalty lives beside love, not inside it. You are now drifting through Cairo's twilight, where the last Egyptian king watched his crown and marriage slip away. King Farouk married Nariman Sadek, a commoner turned queen. She was just 17. The country adored her, at first. He, however, struggled. Scandals, affairs, weight gain, and whispers followed him. She bore it quietly, bore him a son. Then she left, but in exile he still carried her photograph, still spoke of her with softness, long after she remarried. Can you imagine losing everything, power, nation, love, and still longing for the one person who once looked at you without fear? He died young. Her portrait was beside him. Hey friends, close your eyes. It's time to enter a story you may think you know. Princess Diana's heart was rarely at rest. But during her most difficult years, she found comfort in James Hewitt, a cavalry officer with red hair and a gentle way. Their affair lasted 5 years, hidden in shadows, written in letters later sold to tabloids. It ended before her divorce, yet he never stopped defending her memory. Can you imagine being remembered as a footnote in a love story that once meant the world? Sometimes, being someone's shelter is the most royal role of all. You're now resting beneath the chandeliers of Madrid's 19th century palace, where monarchy and scandal waltzed nightly. Queen Isabella II was crowned young, married to a man who showed little interest in her. Her court bloomed with intrigue, among them General Francisco Serrano, dashing, bold, always near. He was said to be the father of one of her children. No proof, just quiet rumors and knowing glances. He helped exile her later, yet she never spoke ill of him. Can you imagine loving someone who one day helps take your throne, but once warmed your hand beneath the banquet table? Even betrayal, it seems, can wear perfume. Dear listener, breathe in the stillness of Tokyo's imperial gardens, where tradition wraps tighter than silk. Masako, brilliant diplomat, fluent in 6 languages, became Crown Princess of Japan in 1993. Everyone expected smiles, airs, ceremonies. Instead, she vanished, For years, she withdrew from public life. Rumors swirled. Depression, exhaustion, isolation. But behind it all, one quiet scandal. Her love of freedom. The palace denied her work, discouraged travel, monitored every moment, and yet she remained. Her husband, Crown Prince Naruhito, stood by her, defended her publicly, a rare act in Japanese royalty. Can you imagine being so controlled that your very thoughts became rebellion? In 2019, she became empress, still reserved, still shining. Hey friends, close your eyes and listen to the snowy hush of 18th century Denmark, where a queen loved a doctor and changed a kingdom. Caroline Matilda, sister of King George III, was sent to marry Christian VII of Denmark, a troubled, unpredictable monarch. Isolated and far from home, she met Johann Struensee, the king's physician. Brilliant, gentle, progressive. He cured the king's mind and won the queen's heart. Soon, whispers filled the court. She was seen walking with him in gardens, laughing in libraries. He rose in influence, introduced reforms, and gave her joy. They had a child. History still debates the paternity, but the court rebelled. Struensee was arrested, executed. Caroline was exiled, never to see her children again. Can you imagine being remembered for reforms and punished for tenderness? Her love reshaped a country, if only for a breath. Dear listener, let's step now into the velvet-draped chambers of Belgium, where power and affection collided like candlelight and shadow. Leopold II ruled Belgium and brutally exploited the Congo. But in his personal life, he adored Caroline Lacroix, a teenage prostitute he met late in life. She became his mistress, then his companion. He gave her titles, estates, fortunes. The public hated her, called her greedy, called her worse. But she stayed, held his hand through illness, mourned him in private. They married in secret just before his death. Can you imagine being loved by a king, yet loathed by his people, until history finally asks why? She lived out her days quietly. No throne, but plenty of stories. Hey friends, dim the lights and imagine a royal heart choosing faith over fame. Stephanie, daughter of King Leopold II, was once Crown Princess of Austria. She married Crown Prince Rudolph, the very Rudolph who died in a murder-suicide pact at Meyerling. Widowed young, shunned by court, she disappeared from the public eye. Then she met Count Elemer Launier, a Hungarian noble. Not quite royalty, not quite proper. They married quietly, lived in modest homes, tended gardens. Can you imagine stepping down from the glittering heights of empire just to finally feel peace in someone's arms? She died far from palaces, but closer to contentment than any crown had offered. You are now floating through the mist of Austrian scandal, where royalty, rebellion, and love made unlikely housemates. Princess Louise, daughter of Leopold II, was known for being fiery. And then she met Count Geza Matacic, a dashing officer with a dangerous past. They ran off together. He dueled for her. She left her husband and titles behind. But it didn't last. He was imprisoned. She was institutionalized. The royal family turned away. Years later, he visited her quietly. She forgave. He wept. Can you imagine risking everything for love, only to meet again through the lens of time and tears? They died in separate countries, but not in bitterness. Hey friends, dim the lights and let's walk slowly through the halls of Sarajevo. Before the shot, before the spark, Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, fell in love with Countess Sophie Chotek, a woman of noble blood, but not high enough. They married anyway. The court disapproved. She wasn't allowed beside him in public ceremonies. Their children were excluded from succession. But in private, they were inseparable. On the day of their assassination, they were together, riding in an open car. She wasn't supposed to be there, but he insisted. Can you imagine loving someone so deeply that, even in death, you'd never be apart? Their story ended a war, but it began with a kiss. Dear listener, let's slip into Russia before the revolution, where snow fell gently on secret letters and teenage hearts. Grand Duchess Anastasia, youngest daughter of Tsar Nicholas II, was spirited, playful, and sharp. She also had a pen pal, Officer Sergei Malama. They wrote often, joked, flirted. She once said he was her knight. The war took him. The revolution took her. No records confirm they ever kissed, but one of her last photos shows her holding a bouquet he sent. Can you imagine being remembered only for your tragic end, while the tender beginnings remain forgotten? In those letters, a young girl lived and loved before the world fell silent. Hey friends, take a deep breath. We're stepping into a ballroom of masks, whispers, and one lingering secret. King Gustav III was theatrical, extravagant, and deeply private. His court buzzed with rumors of affairs never named, lovers never introduced. One story lingers, a masked ball where he danced all night with a mysterious nobleman. No names, just music, glances, and silence. The next day, the man vanished. Some believe it was his secret love, others, a ghost of desire. Can you imagine knowing your most romantic moment was one that left no record, just a memory beneath a mask? He was assassinated years later, but the music never stopped playing in stories. You are now resting in a Victorian haze where two worlds almost touched. But duty tore them apart. Princess Helene, devout and elegant, fell for Prince Albert Victor, grandson of Queen Victoria. They wanted to marry. Truly, genuinely wanted it. But she was Catholic, he Anglican. Politics froze what hearts warmed. She considered converting. He waited, but it wasn't enough. They parted. She married another. He died young. Can you imagine walking past a cathedral knowing you almost stepped inside it to say, I do? But the world said, don't. Some romances never break rules. They just bend and snap in silence. Hey friends, stretch gently. You're entering the opulent age of corsets and cigars, where one mistress held the king's heart with grace. Edward VII, before and during his reign, was infamous for affairs. But Alice Keppel was different. Charming, intuitive, elegant. She soothed him, read the room, read his moods. She wasn't just a companion. She helped manage his correspondence, smoothed scandals, eased illness. Even Queen Alexandra, his wife, tolerated her. He called for Alice on his deathbed. She wasn't allowed in, but stood outside the door, waiting. Can you imagine being the one person someone longs for in their last breath, and still being kept away? She left quietly. No bitterness, just memory. Dear listener, dim the lights and return to a royal garden where love bloomed late, but still boldly. Princess Margaret, years after the heartbreak of Peter Townsend, met Roddy Llewellyn, a landscape gardener 17 years her junior. It was quiet at first, then tabloid mayhem. The public was cruel, the palace embarrassed, but she didn't care. He brought laughter, youth, and an escape from duty. They traveled, danced, gardened. They didn't marry, but when she fell ill, he was there. Can you imagine finding peace in someone the world disapproved of, yet feeling, at last, understood? Sometimes scandal isn't about rebellion. It's about renewal. Hey friends, if you love this gentle journey through royal hearts and hidden histories, don't forget to subscribe and leave a quiet little comment below. There are 60 more tales waiting for you. Each one a soft secret tucked into history's sleeve. Hey friends, dim the lights. We're now in Imperial Russia, where scandal, devotion, and danger whispered through marble halls. Princess Irina, niece of Tsar Nicholas II, was known for her beauty. She married Prince Felix Yusupov. Wealthy, eccentric, and magnetic, they appeared perfect. But their marriage hid 1,000 shadows. Felix was rumored to prefer the company of men. One of them, Grand Duke Dmitri, was often seen at his side. More than friends, many believed. And Irina. She seemed to know, and chose not to judge. They stayed together, even after Rasputin's murder, even through exile. Can you imagine building a life around appearances, but filling it with unexpected compassion? They lived out their days in France, not broken, just quietly rearranged. Dear listener, come softly into the 1950s Netherlands, where a queen turned to spiritual healing and nearly lost her crown. Queen Juliana, gentle and idealistic, faced a family crisis. Her daughter was going blind. Desperate, she brought in Greet Hofmans, a faith healer, mystic, and confidant. Their bond grew intense. Hofmans moved into the palace, advised Juliana on matters far beyond medicine. The court panicked. Juliana refused to dismiss her. Her husband threatened divorce. Parliament intervened. Eventually, Hofmans left quietly. Can you imagine trusting someone so deeply that the entire monarchy wavered because of it? Juliana remained queen. But her faith in friendship nearly changed history. Hey friends, breathe in a modern fairy tale, one with treadmills instead of tiaras. Crown Princess Victoria of Sweden met Daniel Westling at the gym. He was her trainer, modest, quiet, grounded. She was heir to the throne. They dated in secret. He was mocked by tabloids. Not royal enough, not polished enough, but she loved him. Deeply, after years of pressure, they married, and he became Prince Daniel, gracefully, respectfully, without losing himself. Can you imagine lifting weights beside someone, and realizing you'd carry a crown for them too? Love, it turns out, wears sneakers before it ever tries on regalia. You are now drifting through the gardens of Highgrove, where scandal once bloomed like roses, slow, thorny, and quietly enduring. Prince Charles loved Camilla before he ever married Diana. But the timing was wrong. She married someone else. He was steered toward duty. Still, they stayed close. Letters, phone calls, longing. Years later, after heartbreaks and tragedy, they reunited, married, and stood before the world. Older, wiser, finally together. Can you imagine loving someone long enough that time itself bends in your favor? They were once scorned. Now they rule, side by side. Hey friends, take a deep breath. We're entering the golden halls of Gloriana herself. Queen Elizabeth I never married. The Virgin Queen, they called her. But behind that title was Robert Dudley. They'd known each other since youth. He was her master of the horse, her favorite, her shadow. He was married, then widowed under suspicious circumstances. They were never confirmed lovers, but always inseparable. She called him Sweet Robin. He signed letters, "Yours most faithful." Can you imagine being loved by a queen who swore never to give her heart, but clearly already had? When he died, she locked herself away. For days, no one could reach her. Dear listener, let's drift into a quiet bond built during war and silence. Prince Andrew of Greece married Princess Alice of Battenberg. Dignified, devout, and deaf from childhood. He was a soldier, restless. She, deeply spiritual. Their lives were complicated. He strayed. She broke down. Yet, through distance and turmoil, they kept returning to each other. Years later, in exile, she founded a religious order. He watched from afar. Can you imagine building a marriage that bends, but doesn't break, even as faith and flesh pull in opposite directions? When he died, her cross lay on his chest. Hey friends, dim the lights. We're now caught between empires and hearts. Victoria Melita, granddaughter of Queen Victoria, first married a duke she didn't love. It ended in divorce. Then came Grand Duke Kirill of Russia, her cousin, forbidden by Orthodox rules. But she loved him. They married anyway, lost their titles, were exiled, but they stood firm. Years later, Russia collapsed, and suddenly, Kirill declared himself Tsar in exile, and she, his Tsarina. Can you imagine being cast out for love, only to end up crowned in memory? History never crowned them, but their bond ruled their lives. You're now resting beneath desert stars, where East and West met and chose each other. King Hussein of Jordan, charismatic and thoughtful, had been married before. But in 1978, he met Lisa Halaby, an American architect. She converted to Islam, took the name Noor. They married. Whispers flew. Could she rule as queen? Would the people accept her? But she dedicated herself to Jordan. Education, women's rights, refugees. Can you imagine changing your entire identity? Not to lose yourself, but to love someone fully? She became Queen Noor, not just in name, but in heart. Hey friends, let's step into a Scandinavian hush, where two royals quietly cherished one another amid looming expectations. Princess Margaret of Connaught, granddaughter of Queen Victoria, married the Crown Prince of Sweden. They were matched by diplomacy, but became genuinely devoted. She introduced art to the palace, gardened endlessly, and bore him 5 children. When she died suddenly in her 30s, he never remarried until much later, and even then, only reluctantly. Can you imagine being loved so deeply that even a king preferred loneliness to anyone else? Her roses still bloom at their summer estate. Dear listener, settle in beneath a silent Japanese moon where love never dared write itself down, but lingered in every gesture. Emperor Meiji had many consorts, but one stood apart, Yanagihara Naruko, lady-in-waiting turned imperial companion. She bore his son, the future Emperor Taisho, but their bond was deeper than duty. She composed poetry for him, sat in stillness beside him during ceremonies. No records name her as empress, but in quiet haiku and lacquered keepsakes, her presence echoes. Can you imagine being the mother of an empire's future, and yet remaining unmentioned? In the silence she endures, gentle, eternal. Hey friends, dim the lights, and imagine walking alone through alpine meadows, where even an empress could lose herself. Elizabeth of Austria, Sisi, as history remembers her, was ethereal, restless, and rarely at home in court. One man stirred her spirit, Count Gyula Andrassy, Hungarian statesman, revolutionary, and perhaps more than just a confidant. He admired her, fought for her. She once called him the handsomest man in the monarchy. Their letters hint at affection. Their glances spoke more. When he died, she wore black. For days, she refused to speak. Can you imagine loving someone from opposite ends of power and yet meeting in the middle again and again? Their story ended in sighs, not declarations. Dear listener, let's wander now into the hazy world of wartime alliances, where power and admiration occasionally blurred into something deeper. Prince Wilhelm of Prussia, heir to the German throne, met Enver Pasha, Ottoman Minister of War, during World War I. They admired each other greatly. Letters were filled with respect and coded warmth. No scandal ever surfaced, but diaries mention evenings of private conversation, long walks, and shared dreams of empires reborn. Can you imagine loving someone in a language your country would never translate? Sometimes, history's strangest romances are the ones that never quite reveal themselves. Hey friends, take a gentle step into Tudor shadows, where politics and passion lit flickering candles of hope. Mary the Wise, daughter of Henry VIII, was a queen of fire and faith. Her reign is remembered for persecution, but her heart carried one quieter longing. Cardinal Reginald Pole, diplomat, scholar, and cousin, was her spiritual mirror. They exchanged letters for years. He remained celibate, but she once dreamed aloud of marrying him. They died within hours of each other. Can you imagine loving someone your religion denied, but your soul still recognized? Their affection remains, a theological hush inside royal halls. Hey friends, we're moving now into a modern memory, filled with flashes of paparazzi and sand-strewn safaris. Before Meghan, there was Chelsea Davy, Zimbabwean-born lawyer and Prince Harry's longtime on-again, off-again love. They met young, danced at polo matches, and fled to quiet places when the world watched too closely. She never wanted the spotlight. He never stopped caring. Eventually, they parted, with affection, not bitterness. She was at his wedding years later, seated quietly, smiling gently. Can you imagine being the person someone almost chose, but loving them enough to let go? Sometimes, happy endings begin with a graceful exit. Dear listener, let's enter the hushed and gilded silence of the Romanov court, where loneliness reached out for comfort in feminine hands. Alexandra, Empress of Russia, felt isolated in a foreign land. Her husband adored her, but duty pulled him away. Her children were fragile, the court cruel. And then came Anna Virubova, nurse, friend, guardian of secrets. They were inseparable, slept in the same quarters, shared journals, defended Rasputin together. Some whispered it was love, others codependency, but through every upheaval, Alexandra clung to her. Can you imagine trusting someone more than your own crown? Even in exile, Alexandra asked for Anna. Hey friends, we now rest beneath cherry blossoms, where tradition once cracked open to let in a quieter love. Emperor Akihito, heir to the chrysanthemum throne, chose to marry Michiko Shoda, a commoner. It was historic, unprecedented. They met on a tennis court, laughed freely, and, despite resistance, married in 1959. She brought warmth to the palace. He walked beside her, not in front. Can you imagine an emperor breaking centuries of custom just to hold hands in public? They reigned with humility and retired together in peace. Dear listener, slip now into Edwardian England, lace gloves, quiet scandals, and a mistress who knew how to blend laughter with loyalty. Daisy Greville, Countess of Warwick, was bold, political, and captivating. She became one of Edward VII's most famous mistresses. Their affair lasted for years. But she was more than a diversion. She championed workers' rights, women's suffrage, and the poor. After their affair ended, she lost her fortune supporting social causes. Can you imagine a woman remembered for royal whispers, but forgotten for louder, nobler deeds? Even Edward admitted she had a better heart than most kings. Hey, friends, breathe in the crisp northern air of Denmark's royal court, where second chances sometimes come wrapped in Parisian charm. Prince Joachim, after a public divorce, met Marie Cavalier, a French-born diplomat with quiet grace. They married in 2008. She stepped into the role with elegance, raising his children alongside their own. She never chased a crown, just balance. Can you imagine walking into someone's past and still helping them build a better present? Marie gave Joachim not a new title, but a calmer chapter. Dear listener, now drift into Regency England, where one heir found love too briefly. Charlotte, only child of George IV, was lively and loved by the people. She was arranged to marry others, but she chose Leopold of Saxe-Coburg. They adored each other, shared ideas, read together, laughed often. But just a year after their wedding, she died giving birth. He mourned for decades, never truly moved on. Can you imagine being someone's whole world and leaving them with only echoes? Leopold never remarried for love, only duty. Hey friends, dim the lights. We're ending this part with a love that crossed oceans and renounced titles. Princess Mako, niece of Emperor Naruhito, fell in love with Kei Komuro, her university classmate, a commoner, a lawyer. They faced media storms, public criticism, bureaucratic delay. Still, she stood by him. In 2091, she left the imperial family to marry him. No crown, no state wedding, just love. Can you imagine walking away from an empire, not in protest, but in quiet commitment? They live in New York now, uncrowned but not unloved. Hey friends, let's drift back into Victorian England, where one royal artist may have sketched more than just landscapes. Princess Louise, daughter of Queen Victoria, was brilliant and creative. Sculptor, designer, rebel in pearls. She married the Duke of Argyll, a political match. But whispers grew around Walter Sterling, her art tutor, quiet and attentive. She painted long hours with him, smiled more than expected, and once defended his honor when he was dismissed from court. No letters survived, but in her studio, a half-finished sculpture bore an unmistakable resemblance to Walter's face. Can you imagine leaving your true feelings hidden in marble, where only silence could see them? She never spoke of him, but her chisel said plenty. Dear listener, breathe in the scent of Mediterranean pines. Spain, summer, and secrets all bound in a single name. King Juan Carlos I of Spain restored the monarchy after dictatorship. A beloved modernizer, and a man who lived boldly. Enter Corinna Larson, German-Danish businesswoman, elegant and discreet. She accompanied him on safaris, business trips, even state visits. Rumors of an affair became headlines, and when scandal hit, offshore accounts, missing millions, her name was always near. Still, she claimed they loved one another, deeply, despite the palace, despite the crown. Can you imagine being part of a king's life, then asked to disappear from the story? Some affairs echo louder after they've ended. Hey, friends, dim the lights. This story isn't about an affair with another person, but with a quieter kind of rebellion. Crown Princess Masako, brilliant and once free-spirited, entered Japan's imperial family with bright eyes and heavy expectations. Behind the palace walls, she wasn't allowed to work, speak freely, or even travel. So she began writing. Journals, letters, unsent essays. She confided in herself, no scandal, no lovers. But her notebooks held pages soaked in emotion, frustration, longing. Can you imagine living your most intimate moments in ink, because the world left you no other space? Some royal affairs begin not with another, but with the voice you almost lost. You are now drifting through early Victorian court, where a scandal bloomed from whispers and wounded reputations. Lady Flora Hastings, lady-in-waiting to Queen Victoria's mother, fell ill. Her stomach swelled. People assumed the worst, an affair, a pregnancy. The court turned against her. Even Prince Albert joined the speculation. But after her death, an autopsy revealed a liver tumor, not a child. Too late. Albert was devastated, the Queen shamed, but history never quite forgave the rumor. Can you imagine being remembered for something that never happened? Because power prefers a tale over the truth. Lady Flora's name faded, but the hush around her never fully left the palace. Hey, friends, lean in. It's time for a softer love story that rarely reached headlines, but still lingered in sighs. Princess Diana, post-divorce and burdened with fame, fell for Hasnat Khan, a heart surgeon. Quiet, private, grounded. They met in a hospital. No crown, no cameras, just tea and shared thoughts. She called him her soulmate. He avoided the spotlight. They kept their love in tucked-away cafes and borrowed doorways. But it couldn't last. He wouldn't live under royal scrutiny. She couldn't live without acknowledgement. Can you imagine loving someone so perfectly ordinary, yet perfectly unreachable? She said goodbye gently, but never stopped calling it real. Dear listener, let's drift back to Second Empire France, where fans flicked and eyes met across crowded salons. Eugénie, wife of Napoleon III, was elegant and calculating. But one name always appeared in her memoirs, Prince Richard von Metternich. He was married, diplomatic, charming. They exchanged letters, sat together often, and though nothing was ever confirmed, he once confessed that had they met earlier, perhaps history would look different. Can you imagine knowing the right person at the entirely wrong moment? Some affairs live only in glances, and one too late, if only. Hey friends, drift into the warm grasslands of Kenya, where one young prince learned what it meant to feel free. Prince William, long before royal weddings and protocol, spent time with Jecca Craig, a conservationist's daughter. They were close. So close, in fact, that the tabloids hinted at a secret engagement. She was his guest at his university graduation. He was best man at her wedding. No official romance was confirmed, but she remained in his life long after summer ended. Can you imagine meeting someone who stays in your story, even when they don't get the final chapter? Some names echo softly, like the rustle of acacia leaves in memory. Dear listener, you are now stepping into the snow-covered halls of 17th century Sweden, where a philosopher met a queen and changed her forever. Christina of Sweden summoned René Descartes to her court. She wanted to study, question, explore thought itself. They debated at dawn in freezing rooms, both wrapped in blankets and ideas. No romantic link was proven, but her writings became bolder. His last letters were to her. He died soon after arriving, of pneumonia, some say. Of exhaustion, others believe. Can you imagine meeting someone whose mind kindled your own, and then losing them before you truly began? Their affair may have been of the intellect, but passion has many forms. Hey friends, take a breath. We're in the quiet years of the 1990s, where the press still chased headlines. But some love escaped. Princess Anne, already married, exchanged letters with Timothy Lawrence, her mother's equerry. The letters were stolen, published, intimate. The palace confirmed nothing. But shortly after her divorce, Anne married him in a small private ceremony. No carriages, no titles, just vows. Can you imagine being found out before you had a chance to love publicly, and still choosing it anyway? They've been together ever since, unfussy, untouched by drama. You are now gliding through twilight Vienna, where one emperor found quiet company in the arms of a stage actress. Franz Joseph of Austria lost his son, lived beside a melancholic empress, and ruled in silence. Then came Katharina Schratt, an actress, warm, discreet, and understanding. They met often, shared meals, wrote daily. She was never his mistress in the traditional sense. No scandal, no demands, just presence. Can you imagine spending decades with someone who simply made loneliness feel less sharp? They were never crowned together, but every morning he sent her a fresh bouquet. Hey friends, dim the lights and breathe in the scent of polished wood and political secrets. This is Victorian England again, but with a twist. Princess Alexandra, wife of the future King Edward VII, was beloved, quiet, and often overlooked in her own marriage. Lord Randolph Churchill, father of Winston, was a rising political star. They exchanged letters, attended the same salons. Some claimed they shared more than ideas. Whispers grew, but nothing solid ever landed. Just frequent visits, knowing glances, and an air of quiet sympathy between them. Can you imagine finding comfort outside a cold marriage, in someone who couldn't quite save you, but made the silence easier? Whatever they were, they never admitted. But they never quite parted either. Dear listener, now drift back, farther to ancient Rome, where scandal wasn't whispered, but paraded. Nero, the infamous emperor, lost his wife Poppaea in childbirth. Then he met Sporus, a young boy whom many said resembled her. Nero had him castrated, dressed him as an empress, married him in a public ceremony. To us, it sounds cruel, strange. But in Nero's court, spectacle and grief danced hand in hand. Sporus stayed by his side until Nero's death, wearing silks and sorrow. Can you imagine being loved because you looked like someone else, and yet still holding a space in history that's uniquely yours? Not every scandal is born of passion. Some bloom from grief. Hey, friends, take a gentle step into the Spanish court, where royal marriages masked private betrayals. Victoria Eugenie, granddaughter of Queen Victoria, married King Alfonso IX of Spain. She carried grace. He carried secrets. He had mistresses. One bore him a child. He made no effort to hide it. Victoria stayed, smiled, held her title as shield and sword. She later lived in exile, raised their children, never remarried. Can you imagine sharing your life with someone who left shadows in every corner, and still calling it duty? Sometimes royal heartbreak isn't loud, it just lasts. Dear listener, you are now in a quieter love story, one without scandal, but born of soft rebellion. Princess Patricia, a granddaughter of Queen Victoria, was expected to marry into foreign royalty. She declined. Instead, she chose Alexander Ramsay, a naval officer. No crown, no inheritance, just affection. She gave up her royal title to be his wife. No drama, just choice. Can you imagine loving someone enough to set aside every ballroom, every protocol, every curtsy? They lived simply, and in every photograph she's smiling, really smiling. Hey friends, settle into the smoky 1930s, where jazz hummed and secrets moved through velvet lounges. Prince George, Duke of Kent, was dashing, charming, and complex. Noel Coward, playwright, wit, and cultural icon, was said to be more than a friend. Letters were discreet, their parties legendary. No one spoke aloud, but everyone seemed to know. Coward later wrote characters uncannily like George, elegant, wounded, beautiful. Can you imagine being immortalized not by history books, but by scripts no one dared call true? Their friendship endured. Whatever else they were, the silence protected them. Dear listener, drift gently now through wartime Netherlands, where fog rolled through forests, and so did quiet companionship. Queen Wilhelmina ruled with resolve, but privately, her years of exile in England during the VIII were marked by a close bond with a certain British colonel. His name, rarely mentioned, but his presence was constant. Letters, meetings, mutual respect. No scandal, just steady loyalty that might have been something more. She never remarried, but she kept his photograph on her desk long after returning to her throne. Can you imagine sharing your hardest days with someone whose name history politely leaves out? Some love stories only need a single frame. Hey friends, you're walking now through candlelit palaces before the fall. Imperial Russia on the cusp of everything. Prince Nicholas Romanov, cousin to the Tsar, was vibrant and fiercely independent. He fell in love with Countess Marina, a woman of noble birth but not royal rank. Their love was forbidden. The Tsar refused permission. Nicholas refused to give her up, so he was exiled. They married anyway, quietly. In exile, they lived simply, happily. Can you imagine giving up diamonds, titles, and an empire, just for the right to say, I do? They outlived the dynasty, but not their love. Dear listener, we're in the present now. A royal engagement that unraveled in modern time beneath digital scrutiny. Princess Madeleine of Sweden was engaged to Jonas Bergström, a lawyer. handsome, well-mannered, approved, but then whispers, then photographs, then the engagement was off. She fled to New York, rebuilt, quietly. Later, she found love again, but the world still remembers the one that almost was. Can you imagine planning forever, only to realize you were almost someone else's secret? She chose better, softer, and smiles more often now. Hey friends, take a soft candle and descend into English legend, where stone towers and garden paths guard a lover's name. Henry II of England loved many, but Rosamond Clifford, fair Rosamond, held something deeper. She was hidden in a labyrinth at Woodstock Palace. Some say to protect her from Queen Eleanor's wrath, the Queen found her. The rest? Wrapped in myth. Poison? Dagger? Disgrace? No one knows. Can you imagine loving someone so fiercely you build a maze around them, just to keep them safe? The maze is gone, but the roses still bloom. Dear listener, let's float into a Balkan twilight, where war, writing, and whispers flowed like wine. Queen Marie of Romania, artist, diplomat, spirit of her people, was said to love Prince Barbu Sturby. He was close to her. Too close, said the court. Some believed he fathered her youngest daughter. They exchanged hundreds of letters. He stood at her side through war, peace, and pain. She never confirmed the affair, never denied it, just called him my rock. Can you imagine carrying a love that shaped your reign, and still never speaking its name? When she died, his heart was buried beside hers. Hey friends, dim the lights, and imagine a quiet war between hearts and thrones, one that ended in loyalty but not love. Princess Margaret of Prussia, sister of Kaiser Wilhelm II, married Prince Frederick Charles of Hesse. Their union was political but friendly, respectful. But Margaret's letters hint at another presence in her life, a young tutor who stayed at the court, helping with language, literature, and perhaps her spirit. Nothing ever became official. But his sudden departure and her long sadness after left questions. Can you imagine staying loyal to a crown while your heart quietly lived in someone else's smile? Some love stories leave no scandal, just silence. Dear listener, drift now to Thailand's golden twilight, where a beloved king once played jazz into the early morning. King Bhumibol Adulyadej was a man of deep tradition, but also of hidden passions. Chief among them, music. He composed, played clarinet and saxophone, and surrounded himself with fellow musicians. One singer in particular, a woman whose name was never public, was said to be more than a collaborator. They recorded together, laughed often, and while his heart belonged publicly to Queen Sirikit, in music something else stirred. Can you imagine expressing love only through melody, where every note carried what words could not? The song never aired, but the feeling lingers. Hey friends, breathe slowly. We're now in post-war Greece, where loss, faith, and mystery met in an old stone chapel. Princess Alice, mother of Prince Philip, lived a hard life. Deaf, institutionalized, displaced. After the war, she found peace in religion. She took vows, wore gray, became a nun. But in her writings, one name repeats, an unnamed Greek monk who shared her sense of suffering. They met often, prayed side by side. Some say he helped her through her darkest years. Can you imagine finding intimacy in spiritual companionship? a love never spoken, yet always understood. They shared no bed, but perhaps something deeper. Dear listener, we're now stepping into the discreet shadows of 1930s Sweden, where a king and a tavern owner may have shared more than small talk. Gustav V was elderly, respected, and deeply private. Kurt Hijby was younger, married, and troubled. Their relationship, exposed only after both were gone, involved secret meetings, financial support, and scandal. The Swedish state tried to silence it. Payoffs, trials, suppression. Can you imagine a life where your deepest connection had to be bought, hidden, and denied, just to be real in private? The court said it was blackmail. Hijby said it was love. We may never know. Hey friends, yes, we met them earlier. But there's more. We spoke of Count Fersen and Marie Antoinette's bond, their failed escape, the letters. But did you know many of their letters were censored, entire passages blacked out? In recent years, scientists used infrared to recover the missing ink. And what they found? Passion, desperation, love in phrases like, "You who I love madly," and "I live only to love you." Can you imagine being silenced in life and uncovered centuries later by science? Their affair was once rumor. Now it's nearly proven, and no guillotine can erase it now. Dear listener, glide into the Mediterranean breeze, Monaco's cliffs, perfume, and secrets riding the salt air. Princess Charlotte, daughter of Louis II, was born out of wedlock, legitimized and raised in glittering exile. She later stepped away from royal life and sought a quieter world. Along that path, she met a doctor. Simple, kind, anonymous to history. They never married, but they lived together in a modest home. She wore no jewels, just linen and laughter. Can you imagine trading an entire dynasty for one man who made coffee at sunrise? She found peace not in a crown, but in a quiet breakfast. Hey friends, let's drift further east, into the golden palaces of Mughal India, where myth and memory intertwine. Emperor Akbar ruled a vast empire, wise, fierce, but it's his son, Salim, and the woman Anarkali who steal the romance. Anarkali, a court dancer, was said to have captivated both father and son. Akbar, fearing her influence, ordered her buried alive in a wall. History argues. Was it true? Was she real? But poems endure. In every retelling, she dies for love. Can you imagine being caught between two generations of empire and becoming legend in the process? Whether true or not, her name still means pomegranate blossom, a fragile thing with fire inside. Dear listener, you're now beneath the clouded sky of wartime Europe, where alliances and affections crossed enemy lines. Princess Victoria, granddaughter of Queen Victoria, was married into the Battenberg family. During World War I, while in Russia, she met Sir John Hanbury Williams, a British officer stationed at the Tsar's court. They shared long conversations in gardens, exchanged letters filled with poetry. A brief, beautiful friendship that many say teetered on something more. Can you imagine forming your closest bond while your countries were at war? He returned to Britain. She remained in exile, but she kept his letters. Hey friends, let's return to the present. Royal affairs don't always end in ruin. Sometimes they just begin in surprise. Prince Carl Philip, son of the King of Sweden, fell in love with Sofia Hellqvist, a model, reality TV star, and yoga teacher. The court resisted. The press mocked, but he insisted. They married. She became a duchess. Elegant, sincere, beloved. Can you imagine walking from a tabloid cover into a throne room and never changing who you are? She did, with poise and a little sparkle. Dear listener, exhale slowly as we enter a love story hidden within war and exile. King Zog of Albania was a fierce ruler, unmarried for years, until he met Countess Geraldine Apponyi, a Hungarian noble with a kind face and steel beneath it. They married swiftly. Days later, Italy invaded Albania. They fled, carried their newborn across Europe. They lived in exile, never returned to the throne. But they remained together until his death. Can you imagine being queen for just a breath, and still choosing to walk beside your king in every storm? She never wore the crown again, but she never stopped wearing his ring. Hey friends, dim the lights. We're entering the final years of Imperial Russia, where love could mean losing a kingdom. Grand Duke Michael, brother to Tsar Nicholas II, fell for Natalia Brasova, a divorced commoner. The court forbade their marriage, so they eloped, secretly, abroad. He was removed from succession, cut off, but he never left her. When revolution came, they fled, captured, held apart. He was executed in 1918. Her letters to him were found beside his last coat. Can you imagine choosing love and losing an empire, and still writing their name until your final breath? She lived in exile, never remarried, never stopped signing his name. Dear listener, we revisit Princess Stephanie, widowed young, once crown princess of Austria. Later in life, far from the Austro-Hungarian court, she met Count Elémer Lányé, a Hungarian noble and explorer. They bonded over travel, politics, and a mutual disinterest in appearances. They married quietly, lived modestly. She traded a palace for a cottage with books and wine. Can you imagine losing everything in youth and gaining freedom in the second act? She said it was her first real chapter and her favorite. Hey friends, breathe in the salt air of the Riviera, where royalty met athleticism under the sun. Prince Albert Fers of Monaco, a scientist and sailor, ruled with thoughtfulness. Suzanne Lenglen was a tennis champion, graceful, unstoppable. They met often. He invited her to the palace. Letters flowed between matches. The press speculated. They denied nothing, confirmed nothing. Can you imagine loving someone not because they were royal, but because they moved like poetry across a court? Whatever they were, they both won. Dear listener, let's step into post-war Europe, where faith, family, and politics all tried to control love. Princess Irene fell for Carlos Hugo of Bourbon-Parma, a Carlist pretender to the Spanish throne, and Catholic. She converted in secret, married him without the Dutch Parliament's consent. Her family was stunned. She lost succession rights. Still, she walked down the aisle with her head held high. Can you imagine giving up a kingdom just to follow your heart across a border? They later divorced, but her choice, for a time, reshaped Europe's quiet map of monarchy. Hey friends, yes, Edward and Wallis are known. But what of Thelma? Before Wallis Simpson, Edward's heart belonged to Thelma Furness, an American socialite. They traveled together, wrote poems. He called her his darling one. They traveled together, wrote poems. He called her his darling one. Then she introduced him to her friend, Wallis, and the rest changed everything. Can you imagine loving someone and unknowingly handing them over to your replacement. Thelma left quietly, gracefully, but never forgot. Dear listener, we now enter modern palaces, Dubai's golden spires and British courtrooms. Princess Haya of Jordan married Sheikh Mohammed of Dubai. It looked perfect until she fled. She claimed fear. He claimed betrayal. Their affair, their marriage, their split, it all became a storm. But before it ended, there were poems, gifts, children, and silence. Can you imagine fleeing the man you once loved, only to have the world watch you run? She lives in London now, quiet, but free. Hey, friends, take a step into an unusually gentle scandal, one with paperwork instead of whispers. Prince Amedeo married for love. Elisabetta, an Italian noblewoman, captured his heart. But they forgot to file paperwork with the king, so their marriage wasn't valid for a while. They quietly corrected it. No drama, no disgrace. Can you imagine loving someone so much you don't wait for permission, even from a crown? Their wedding photos still show only joy. Dear listener, drift into the early 20th century, where empire stretched wide, and so did expectations. Prince Arthur, grandson of Queen Victoria, served in India. There, he met Miss Jennings, a lady with no title but captivating wit. They exchanged letters for years. She never returned to England. He never named her publicly. But he left her land, and her letters, kept neatly in his personal effects, survived. Can you imagine being the person someone royal thought of before sleep, but never introduced to the world? Their names were separate, but their stories touched. Hey, friends, return with me to Hawaii once more. Princess Kaiulani, educated abroad, was more than a symbol. She was a poet, painter, and gentle rebel. She met Clive Davies, a young Englishman. Their courtship was quiet, sweet, but the islands were changing. Politics interfered. She returned home. He didn't follow. She died young, and though their letters vanished, local legend remembers him standing beside her casket. Can you imagine being almost someone's forever, then lost to time and tide? She became a monarch only in memory, but in love she ruled. Dear listener, we close with the longest reign, and perhaps the quietest heart. Queen Elizabeth II rarely showed emotion. She was duty, dignity, distance. Oh, but behind closed doors there were private friendships. Riding companions, loyal staff, one valet she called her favorite face. No scandals, no affairs, just tenderness, quietly treasured. Can you imagine being loved by a woman the world called sovereign, who saved her softest smiles for tea and a shared silence? Perhaps that's a scandal too, how even queens need quiet love. Hey, friends, if you've made it all the way through these 100 soft scandals, we'd love to know. Was there one that lingered in your thoughts longer than the rest? Don't forget to subscribe for more stories whispered just before sleep.